So the audit committee will come to order. Welcome to the June 1, 2023 meeting. Do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Okay. Public portions of this meeting are being recorded to aid in the preparation of the minutes. We're scheduled to adjourn at 5:30. Suzanne, will you tell us who's participating virtually?
We have Regent Lee and we have Regent Goodyear.
Very good. Let's talk about the agenda. Basically, we're going to review the internal audit review board chairs activities, focusing on the 23 plans. The 23 plans plus the 24 new plans. In the case of 23, we're evaluating where things stand, of course. We'll also be receiving information in regard to the university's enterprise risk management and IT security. Most of that will happen later when we move to executive session. With that, let's move to approval of the minutes. You received basically two sets of minutes, the executive session minutes from March 24, as well as the public session minutes from May 26. The March executive session minutes were reviewed by members during our May executive session, and no questions or changes were offered to Rick by members. The May public session minutes were provided to members in today's agenda booklet. Are there any questions in regard to the minutes? Hearing none, I move that the audit committee approve the minutes of the March 24, 2022 and the executive session and May 26 public session minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. The minutes are approved. I believe Rick has some comments that he would like to make in regard to the item number 2 with the Auditor General correspondence. Rick?
Very briefly, thank you, Mr. Chair. 76 documents in the Auditor General section were all documents that I believe you should, as members and regents, have received in the past. We just have a year's worth to catch up. And so they're in there for the record to show that we did receive them and the audit committee has seen them. Now I'd like to turn it over to Brad. He's got some comments to make on some of the audits that they've been conducting on us.
Regent Herbold, Regents, I'd like to take a few minutes to cover a recap of ABOR's action items related to Auditor General audits on the ABOR offices and the universities. The first audit in this space is the sunset review of the Board of Regents, which is a report that was issued in June of 2021. The review evaluated the extent to which ABOR had met its statutory objective and purpose and the efficiency with which it operated. One of the areas that were talked about was enterprise risk management in this report, and the board had historically addressed that through the university's financial reviews and through the internal audit committees. However, the essence of the auditor's recommendation in this space was that ABOR establish a more formal process for reviewing enterprise risk management. So the board did that with the adoption of changes to the audit policy 3-104 in February 2022, and by asking for universities' presentations on enterprise risk management over the last 18 months. The second related to the sunset review is a report on university affiliated organizations that was also issued in June of 21, where they recommended clearer policies related to reporting and assurance for the university's relationships with their affiliates. During the meeting on November 18th of 21, the board approved policy 1-125 related to oversight of university relationships with component unit affiliates. And that policy established requirements for reporting the relationships with component unit affiliates that we worked with earlier today in the finance committee meeting. These themes come together again in today's meeting where both risk and audit oversight are being discussed together, which also sets the stage for our upcoming audit and risk management committee in the new year. As a result of this, or at this year's follow-up with the Auditor General, we are expecting that the auditors will determine that the recommendations for these two audits have been satisfactorily implemented and both will be resolved. The third audit is the commercial real estate performance audit that was issued in October of 2019. That audit found that ABOR lacked comprehensive property information and guidance related to its real estate policies that inhibited oversight and accountability. So in response, ABOR created and updated policies related to the guidance that we believe meets all of those recommendations, as well as some new tools in that space. While we believe we've met all of the requirements, in order to have those recommendations be fully closed out by the Auditor General, they need the ability to test those things that we have put in place. And to date, we have not had transactions that meet all those requirements. So we will continue to wait for some commercial lease related actions that might give the Auditor General some evidence that we have followed through with what we put in place. But in the meanwhile, we again believe that we have many of these requirements satisfied. So of these 17 findings, 7 are already officially resolved, with 9 more substantially completed, again, waiting for some of that final evidence in this next year. The final open audit is related to IT security, issued in June of 2018. And the open recommendations involve requiring the universities to monitor and regularly report on IT security program effectiveness, and having ABOR review the results of universities' IT risk assessments. So in September of 22, ABOR updated policy 9-202 university responsibilities to include elements of these 2 open recommendations. We are dealing with some of that today in this meeting, and our expectation is that when the Auditor General reviews this audit and follow up this month in June, that we will have met the requirements and be able to close that audit out. With that, I turn it back to you, Regent Herbold, and open for any questions.
Any questions? With that, we'll move to items 3, 4, and 5, with each of those items featuring a particular university. The agenda for 3, 4, and 5 constitutes us hearing from the Internal Audit Review Board Chair, as well as the Chief Audit Executive from the individual universities. Once again, they'll be reviewing the results of 23 so far and the plans for 2024. Each of the universities hopefully will take only about 10 minutes, so we will keep on schedule. The committee is tasked by policy to review and approve the university's annual audit plans. After all 3 universities have their discussions with us, the committee will then approve those plans as one entity, not 3 individuals. So with that, we should move to ASU and invite the IARB chair and the chief audit exec to the table. Chief audit exec here is Lisa Grace, and we all know Morgan Olson from prior activities today. So with that, I will hand it over to you folks.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I think in the interest of time, I'll just let Lisa make the report here.
Okay. If we can go ahead and skip a couple slides before we jump back to enterprise risk management. One more, please. Oh, I can do it. Great. Great. So I'll start out with our risk assessment activities for fiscal year 23. As part of our risk assessment activities, we're in year 3 of our 3-year cycle that we've defined. As such, we really built on our fiscal year 22 results, including our defined 90 auditable units. We held risk discussions across the university, including executive leadership, senior leadership, key stakeholders, as well as internal audit review board members. As part of those discussions, we really discussed controls and key mitigating strategies for key risk areas across the university, so that we're focusing our audit activities in that space.
Great.
As part of our fiscal year 24 audit plan, we prioritize the enterprise risk areas that will be covered here shortly. As part of that, we have 10 assurance projects planned, as well as 3 advisory consulting type reviews. As part of that, we have a deferred maintenance audit planned, a GLBA audit, a supplier portal assessment, a conflict of interest review, an IoT security focused audit, an application review over Salesforce, 2 financial control reviews at the college or unit level, as well as a P-card spend audit, and then hours allocated to our continuous auditing program. We also have 3 key consulting projects planned, campus security, global operations, as well as our HCM system implementation, as well as keeping 1 project open for management requests. One key item I'll point out for this year's audit plan, for the fiscal year 24 audit plan, is the inclusion of the financial controls team as part of the resources and related projects. This team had previously been managed separate from the internal audit team, still part of my team, but managed as separate resources. Starting with the fiscal year 24 audit plan, those will be consolidated and their projects included in the audit plan accordingly. From a status update perspective, we've made good progress on our FY23 audit plan. We've completed 5 assurance audits, 5 consulting advisory type reviews, as well as 3 continuous auditing project cycles related to mandatory training for new employees. We have a net of 2 projects being removed from our plan for the year due to resource restrictions or limitations. We actually removed 2, paused 1, and then added an additional project to the plan based off of needs throughout the year. We continue to be down 1 resource for the fiscal year. So we started the fiscal year down 1 resource. We actually had 2 individuals with the team leave the department. We've hired 2 positions, so we remain down 1 resource effectively for the year. We've also made good progress on our remediation testing. We've closed out 20 issues, previously identified audit issues over the year, including 3 significant deficiencies. Those were in the areas of chemical inventory, as well as vulnerability management reporting and vulnerability management ownership. We reduced the risk of 2 other significant deficiencies noted related to the coaches, camps, and clinic audit associated with trademark and licensing compliance, as well as the facility use agreement requirements related to minors on campus. While we weren't able to close these issues, we were able to perform validation, and adequate system and process enhancements have been made in order to reduce the risk of those 2 items. We were unable to close out the vulnerability management item related to compliance and general oversight, as the remediation efforts were not effective. We've worked closely with enterprise technology over these areas to understand the root cause of this, as well as to understand their updated management plan. We'll continue to monitor those activities and anticipate that we'll be able to test that in the second half of fiscal year 24. So with that, I'll pause and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Can you give us a bit more color in regard to the vulnerability management issues?
Sure. So the issue that is still remaining is overall compliance with the vulnerability management standard. So remediating or addressing vulnerabilities in a timely manner. Our policy requires critical vulnerabilities to be addressed within 30 days, high risk vulnerabilities to be addressed within 60 days. And then there's other time frames defined for medium or low risk items. As part of the remediation actions over the course of the last 18 months, they've implemented a new scanning approach, bringing that activity in-house, as well as implementing a new platform within ServiceNow to manage that activity. So the scan activity is performed, it's loaded into the platform, and then that's used for ongoing tracking of the vulnerabilities. As part of that effort, while there were improvements made as part of the remediation actions, there was a disconnect between the security team as well as the engineering team, which just resulted in low adoption of the new process.
Was the weakness in the IT area?
Yes, so it's related to remediating vulnerability management issues across the department or across the university. So do scans pick up on vulnerabilities either related to non-patched devices, computers, other vulnerabilities that are detected as part of the defined scanning areas.
That's always a tough one,
Yes,
especially the patch management.
correct.
So, okay, any other questions? Okay, with that, we will move to NAU.
Nope,
Yeah,
there's more.
They have more.
Oh.
Some risk.
Oh, the risk. I'm sorry. Go right ahead. Cut you short there, Morgan.
that's okay. My feelings are not hurt, but we did promise the committee that we would do an update only on our enterprise risk management process. We did a fairly deep dive on this last year, so we'll not repeat ourselves on that, but this is a continuous process. And so we'll provide some updates, and here to help assist with that, to my far right is Nicole Lomo, who's our Vice President for University Business Services. Part of her portfolio includes insurance, risk management, and enterprise resilience. And on my near left is Mike Anderson here. I think, Mike, it's probably your first time to meet this committee. Mike is our new executive in charge of enterprise risk and resilience. Comes to us most immediately previous from Arizona Public Service, but had a long career with the FBI, including a couple of stints as special agent in charge in 2 different large cities, and a good background with what I think is now an inactive CPA certificate and a law degree. And so he is responsible, along with the rest of the team, for identifying risks of various types, including enterprise risks, and then mitigating and managing them. So we have a short presentation for you here, and we're happy to stand then for questions.
I'm not getting this to actually reverse.
Is it reversing?
It is not. Can you guys back up to the enterprise risk part of the presentation? Clearly, PowerPoint is one of the risks that we should be monitoring here, but
Yeah.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So a starting point for us with enterprise risk is looking at these 5 major factors to determine if we have an enterprise risk issue. Financially, we're talking about risks that would reach in the millions and millions of dollars. Operational risks, COVID-19 is probably the best example, where you would result of COVID-19, major business interruption issues. Also had supply chain issues, another risk there. Reputational risk, anything that would negatively affect the brand of ASU. I call it the headline of the New York Times test, or Arizona Republic in this case. Safety is another factor that we look at when we determine if we have an enterprise risk issue. Obviously, active shooters top of mind for a lot of folks, but we run laboratories as well. And then technology, you have a cybersecurity risk. You have bad actors there, attacks on networks and data breaches, but then you also have potential outages with actors that are non-nefarious, and we just have that could impact the operations of the university at large. So from that, we come down to these 10 enterprise risks. I've touched on a number of them already, the obvious ones like cybersecurity, campus violence, lab safety, and the like. But there's some others that have a little bit more nuance, like sustainability. It's a high priority for ASU. And so we classify that as an enterprise risk to make sure we're hitting our climate reduction, our carbon reduction targets. Enrollment, although enrollment is strong, we would never take this one off the board, because it's a bedrock of ASU operations to make sure that we have students at the graduate and undergraduate level coming in. And then also making sure we have high quality students as well. Touched on campus violence and pandemic a bit, international operations, travel issues, faculty and students overseas, business ventures overseas. So this is also another enterprise risk that we have to be very mindful of. One that doesn't get a lot of attention is deferred maintenance and infrastructure. There's a potential cost, financial cost, and a reputational cost to not investing in maintaining the many facilities that we have and other infrastructure. And then talent management, I believe this is an enterprise risk for any organization. Are we bringing in the right people that have the kind of innovation and the visionary approach that ASU requires? And then are we retaining those folks when we bring them in? So with those risks, what we do is we apply the risk cycle to it. We start with identifying those risks. Oftentimes that can be the biggest challenge, getting all the stakeholders in a room, get them to agree what our highest risks are. You have to do the analysis, looking at the mitigations, looking at resilience, recovery if risk has not been properly addressed. Then the assessment and the prioritization of those risks, how strong are our controls, what are our gaps? And then even within risks, oftentimes we have to prioritize based on limited resources, those sub-risks. The mitigation aspect of the cycle is where we actually have the implementation by the risk owners. And then finally, we get to the monitoring aspect of it, where my team will do some monitoring through workshops and through this type of analysis. The risk holders also, risk owners also have a big role to play in that. And then, of course, we have audit that will do a deep dive and do some verification of practices, do a lot of compliance work. And so in short, that is the enterprise risk program for ASU, and open up for questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Regent Herbo. Coming from the FBI background, and I believe you have some counterintelligence background. So for the international operations and the cybersecurity, because that's where, you know, we get attacked or we get with certain actors that try to infiltrate or get information from our university or even in the research area that is very critical for our university. So what have you found, and especially coming from that background, because that helped a lot to see what can be mitigated or proactively try to put some controls?
So I'll start with the cybersecurity component, because normally you're going to have foreign actors that are going to try to attack our networks. We have a very good relationship with the FBI, DHS, and our partners to make sure that we're looking at indicators of compromise and TTPs, as they describe it, as the tactics and techniques and protocols. And so we have a very robust sharing relationship there. And then, of course, we have all of the measures and the mitigations that are in place with the firewalls and the segmenting of our systems and the patch management. We have user training relating to training folks to recognize what potential phish emails. So we layer all of that on top of a very strong relationship with the FBI and DHS to make sure that if we do identify a bad actor, that we are quickly in coordination with them in order for us to get our systems back up, but then allow for law enforcement to go after the attacker.
Just one thing to add is Mike also oversees emergency management, and we do regular desktop exercises to test ransomware, for example. So we don't just try to mitigate, we mitigate everything we can, but we're also testing in the eventuality if something does happen, how would we react, who does what when, so that we can mitigate that as quickly as possible.
So thank you. And when our staff travel, faculty or students, during traveling, there's so many components for people asking just in an innocent way. Do we get some training for travelers?
We do. And in fact, we just did we call them a defensive briefing with faculty and staff out in China just a few weeks ago. And we brought in experts from the FBI that would give them guidance on how to operate there in a secure environment. And then, frankly, we also provided some information about how they would to be able to have a plan if they were need to leave China. And so that is a program that we're trying to expand out to all the other countries that we have personnel in.
Thank you. Sorry, I have another question. Okay. Sure. Being ASU growing in the research area, and with the government, you know, contracts and more involved with the Navy programs and Air Force, I believe that we have some CUI, control unclassified information. So how do we mitigate, or how do we get pass that NIST score, because this is very important when we do government contracts, even if that's program for the Air Force or the Navy. I don't know if I'm asking the right question or do you understand my question about how do we have control for those CUI documents, CUI emails, because it comes from the government side.
So like confidential emails and separate servers.
No, it's just the government, since I know that we are doing more defense contracts and we have more programs with the Air Force and the Navy. The government is getting more strict to send emails or to go to their portals, just even to go to PI, which is one of the portal for contracts. And you always see control and classified information. And it's right now, I didn't pay attention to that in the past, but they're getting more and more strict for any organization, whether it's education, private business, contractors, to have controls. And they will come back to you and they say, you know, if you don't have a score with NIST, you are not going to get the contract. So I'm just asking this question because we are getting contracts from the government, correct?
Yes.
So
I don't know if that's
I can add a couple things to that. So we do have a robust program within the research area under ORIA, which is part of the team that supports just overall operations related to export control. There's also a dedicated security team within research that would be responsible for that score. And I can't speak specific to that, but they do have a dedicated team for their research space and the data centers associated with that. They also have a really robust conflict of interest process to ensure that information and involvement in other projects, other countries that could potentially impact anything that we have an award for or from the government, that there's proper disclosure there, proper controls accordingly. So most of that is handled within the research group and then pulls in other groups as necessary.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
Good. Listen, thank you very much. We'll now move on to NAU.
Thank you, Regent Herbold, members of the committee. Joined here with Mark Rupert, our Chief Audit Executive, Becky McGaw, who many of you heard from earlier today. She is our Associate Vice President for Contracting, Purchasing, and Risk Management, as well as Steve Burrell, our VP for Information Technology and Chief Information Officer. So I'll start with a couple comments related to the IARB and then turn it over to Mark to talk about the audit plan for FY23 as well as FY24. And then we'll move into the enterprise risk management presentation. So our IARB has met 5 times since the last audit committee last May, focusing in on getting updates from Mark and his team on audit progress, looking and prioritizing work on remediation or the significant items to follow up, of which we've continued to make progress in closing out those improvement opportunities, as well as getting feedback from Mark in terms of areas to think about for future audit plans. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over to Mark, and he's going to comment on the audit plan.
Great. Thanks, Bjorn. So for fiscal 23, I'd like to call it sort of the rebuilding of internal audit since I started the year with all new team members. So it's been a good year in that regard. We have completed 3 audit projects. We have a number of other projects in play as well. We started a fraud risk assessment process, which is new for NAU. We completed assessments in Becky's areas, namely accounts payable, purchasing, and then also the comptroller's office. So our goal over time, you'll see that in the fiscal 24 plan, is to continue applying that process until we've covered all major departments of the university. So we also have a good number of projects in progress. We're doing deferred maintenance. That project is close to being closed, contracting, research indirect costs, and we just started planning our fiscal 23 IT security commitment to the board, which is focused on IT asset disposals. In terms of remediation, we had We knocked 13 items off the list since the last time, including one significant item, and we only have one significant item left open, which relates to our conflict of interest management process and a system challenge we were dealing with. That is expected to be addressed by the end of this month, and then we will validate and should have positive updates on that later on. Beyond that, any questions on fiscal 23 progress?
No.
Okay, with that, I'll go into the audit plan. So I'll let Becky speak to more of the details about ERM. Just after this, we use the ERM process to drive our risk-based planning decisions for audit. So what we do is the current ERM process as it matures is focused very much on the high-level risks that impact NAU as a whole. So we identify audit projects from our audit universe, from emerging risk trends, industry data, what have you. We create a list of about, given our sort of budget, maybe 25 projects. We provide that to the IRB, ask each of them to vote on which they think would have the most impact, most positive impact on NAU. I then take that, tabulate them, come back to the IRB, which with the highest ranked items, and identify what I think the audit plan should consist of. The IRB discusses that. And then we ultimately come here to present a formal plan to the board. So some of the projects this year include NCAA compliance. So we are continuing to follow up with NCAA compliance audits on a 3-year cycle. This is currently the second of the 3 years. We're going to do an audit of the athletics ticket office, university transit services and parking, our affiliate management process, which is somewhat IT related in terms of how affiliates get access to different aspects of NAU. HIPAA compliance, a tuition waiver audit. We're going to continue to do consulting services around business process improvement. So one of the things I didn't mention in my fiscal 23 summary was that we are just about done closing a complete review of the facilities billing process. And we supported Steve's team in a review and update of the IT project management process. So we're going to continue that. And then we have a 10% approximate agility allocation, I would call it, in case something comes up during the year that we didn't plan for. And then strategically, this is the 4th year of our required standards quality assurance review cycle. So in fiscal 25, we will need to have another peer review. So we're going to devote some resources to evaluating our processes, not only to prepare for that, but also because the Institute of Internal Auditors is currently updating their standards. The standards changes are out for public comment. So we want to make sure we're in front of that strategically. And then we're also going to evaluate our internship program to see if we can expand it to include 1 or more additional interns. Questions?
Terrific. Other questions? Okay, should we talk about risk?
We will talk about risk. And as Morgan and ASU noted, this is an update to our presentation and deep dive that we did last year, last May. So we will give broad overview and Becky will walk through this, and Steve can certainly answer anything on the IT front, as I know that that has been a focus.
Thank you. NAU aligns its enterprise risk management strategies with core initiatives and objectives of NAU. Our strategic roadmap 2025 Elevating Excellence was introduced in May of 22. It identifies 7 strategic priorities, each having multiple objectives. Risks that could potentially impact priorities are identified and evaluated. Some risks are specific to a single priority or objective, and some span across all of the priorities and objectives. Risk evaluation includes assessing the risk to determine the impact and likelihood. We chart the results on the heat map. The heat map is used as a quick visual reference for those people who are reviewing it to see the impact and the likelihood. In the high impact, high likelihood are in the upper right-hand corner, low impact, low likelihood are in the lower left-hand corner, and NAU assigns an owner to each of the risks. And the owner is typically an executive level, and they coordinate all the efforts to mitigate the risk according to the action plans that we identify. NAU's risk program oversight includes a includes university-wide boards that inform the president's leadership team, risk oversight groups, such as internal audit and the Enterprise Risk Management Oversight Committee, or ERMAC, which oversees the enterprise risk management. That has a broad representation of membership from across campus, centralized operations such as purchasing, HR, and finance, and various compliance functions. Risk mitigation and remediation. We have focused assessments. We conduct annual IT and data assessments. Job hazard analysis are conducted to identify job hazards that are actually used to inform proper training, equipment, and procedures. We employ training efforts to include IT security, compliance, and each of the centralized units provides specific training related to its area of business. IT controls are utilized, such as firewalls, two-factor authentication, automated monitoring, workflow routing. Workplace initiatives are being implemented to include our multi-year compensation increases and flexible work programs such as hybrid first, winter break closure, and the 4-day summer schedule. We also are utilizing cloud services through third parties for certain IT solutions.
I see some brilliant decisions in that area.
And we were asked to talk a little bit about metrics, and I just wanted to say that we do track specific metrics that are related to specific risks. But in terms of our enterprise risk management program, we aren't mature enough yet to have identified all of the risks for the effectiveness of the program, but we're working on those right now. And so
Terrific.
open it up for questions.
I have a question in regard to cyber attacks. Have you had anything that's of a serious nature, a denial of service or anything that has really caused discomfort on the campus?
Steve Burrell again, CIO for NAU. Short answer is yes. We're under attack every day. There have been some events, probably not appropriate to discuss in a public session. So I'll be happy to answer more details later. But we do have a protocol that Becky and I have developed to respond to those very quickly and effectually. But yes, I mean, the short answer is we've had some issues, not many over the years, but ones that certainly do draw our concern.
Is your ability to catch them improved?
Yes, immensely. We have implemented a number of different facilities and capabilities to monitor what's going on in our environment and to respond to 0-day threats as they occur, to escalate quickly to mitigative efforts. So I wouldn't say we're, top of the line with that, right? I mean, it's a challenging game to stay ahead of these bad actors, but our ability to respond and notice and monitor has greatly improved over the last years.
Has any of the attacks caused major disruption in the university, major downs?
Yeah, great question. No, we haven't suffered, extensive downtime. It does impact individuals, of course, and perhaps working groups. But we've had no major disruptions to service, denial of service attacks or anything like that, which have disrupted university business and teaching and learning.
Great. Any other questions of these folks? Hearing none, we will move on now to progression, University of Arizona.
John Lewis is a risk. John's a risk. Lewis is a risk. Make sure he's on this list. Close. Moving on. Cal steps up. There you go.
Hey, Lisa.
Thank you, Regent Herwold. We're going to switch things up a little bit. We're going to talk about risk first because we want to highlight how our approach to enterprise risk management is coordinated with our internal audit function. We've got lots of folks at the table today. Sarah Click, our Chief Audit Executive, Alina Collette is our Chief Information Security Officer, Miguel Delgado, our Chief Risk Officer, and Barry Brumman, our Chief Information Officer. We should be able to cover the gamut, and I'm going to turn it to Miguel first to talk about enterprise risk management.
Yeah, good afternoon, Regents. We'll begin by talking about ERM. And I think one thing to recognize is that ERM is generally viewed as a framework. So you'll see some definite similarities between the way we approach it, and I think our counterparts at NAU and ASU attempt to tackle the task in a similar way. So as you can imagine, if we try to compile a list of all our risks, the list would be encyclopedic. I mentioned encyclopedia to one of my kids the other day, and they had no clue what I was talking about. So that was made me feel old. But so what you see here are sort of the overarching buckets that we use to categorize the major classifications of risk. One of the things to realize here is we have very targeted efforts in each of these buckets. I think ASU had 5, we have 6. So we just view it a little bit differently, but I think we're trying to capture the same risk exposures. So we have very targeted measures in each of these areas, but really what ERM seeks to do is to sort of zoom out and take a high level view across the landscape. I think ERM sort of focuses on 2 major themes. I think the first would be interconnectedness. How do these buckets, how does an event in one bucket connect with an event in another bucket? So I think a simple way to look at it is to say that these buckets are not mutually exclusive. We could have an event, say, in the compliance bucket, it arises there, but yet it's going to bleed over into, it's going to cause a financial harm to the university. That can bleed over into operations. Of course, as Mr. Anderson mentioned, the reputational harm seems to bleed over into every other category. I think he called it the front page newspaper test. I call it the TMZ test, but I think we're a little less sophisticated, but I think you get the idea of what we're trying to avoid. So we look for the interconnectedness, and then more importantly, we try to connect these risks with the strategic risks and mission of the university, and identifying the things that could impede our strategic success as a university. So we also use a heat map to sort of visually present where certain risks would fall. We look at 2 major metrics. The first would be, you can see on the X and Y axis there, the likelihood of a risk, and then the impact of a risk. So those are sort of the 2 main things that we look at. We take a similar approach in terms of assigning ownership and finding senior leaders. I think ERM programs that have failed, in many cases, failed to put a senior person above a certain category. So they weren't able to devote the resources needed to address issues. So we have senior leaders in those roles over those categories. And then, of course, we also use that to develop mitigation plans for how we're going to address those risks. And the heat map, again, just sort of gives you a visual. There's 4 categories there, and the goal is always to move any risk to the lower left-hand corner. This is actually a similar matrix to what the FAA uses to measure whenever there's planes in the sky, the risks with each particular flight. So we take a similar approach in how we try to monitor this. And it's worth noting that even for issues not in the traditional audit plan, we approach those risks in a similar fashion through our ERM program. So this slide gives you an idea of how we approach this from a committee standpoint. The name of our risk committee is the University Risk Oversight Committee. Everybody much prefers to refer to it as UROC. When you're talking about something as dry and bland as risk, you have to give it a cool name, right? So that's sort of what we tried to do here. By intention, this committee is cross-functional, multidisciplinary, and we rely heavily on expertise in these areas. And then we also bring in subject matter experts as needed.
Sarah?
You have the details in the your materials. The team's been very busy. We've issued reports. We have some in progress. We're on target for the ones on progress. What's very exciting is that the team working with management was able to remediate and close 19 open audit issues, including the 3 red ones that we had. So that was very exciting. What's not so exciting is that we're ending the year down 1 resource, but that's going to be a priority this summer to try to get somebody else in. I don't know how to use this. So for our 24 plan, there's quite a bit on there. It's an aggressive plan, but I think it's helpful to have a good direction as to where you're going. It aligns with the ERM at the university. We have operational audits, compliance, financial, strategic. Of course, then we're going to follow up because we still have 14 open audit issues. And then as we issue more reports, we could have additional ones to add to that list. And then our quality assurance and improvement program, as Mark mentioned, we have not yet had our initial peer review. So we're gearing up for that. And as Mark also mentioned, the IIA is changing the standards. So it's going to be a little interesting on that, but it's a good process and we're excited to get that done.
I think I'd just like to add, thank you, Sarah, for the follow-up items and the ongoing efforts. We've been very focused on cybersecurity, and it continues to be an area of risk at all universities. We've heard our partners here talk about the questions that you've asked have been focused on that area, and we are committing substantial resources to advance our information security program. And our recent audit findings confirm that our centrally managed IT services are fully secure. Thank you. Thank you. Our IT services that are managed at the college and department level are going through a security improvement program. And we've met the first 2 milestones in that program. So we've developed a campus-wide inventory for all of our IT services and systems. And we've established a plan to centrally manage campus IT services and systems that require comprehensive security support, monitoring, and maintenance. And we'll provide updates on that program at future audit committee meetings. I think that the
Audit and risk.
Audit and risk as we move forward. Sorry. And we're all here to answer any questions you have related to FY23, FY24, or ERM.
Very good. Any questions? Very clear. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
If there aren't any final questions, before we entertain a motion to move to executive session, we have to approve the 24 plans. So I move the committee approve fiscal year 2024 audit plans of ASU, NAU, and University of Arizona as presented. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Any abstentions? Thank you, everyone. We're ready to move to executive session. Before we vacate, I will remind those that are coming in virtually that you're going to have to transition to a different Zoom address. The participants for the first section of this meeting will be the regents and the ABOR and university personnel as specifically authorized by the respective CFOs. With that, we're ready to convene executive session. Is there a second that we move to executive session?
Second.
All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Very good. This session is adjourned, and we will now move to executive session, and this concludes the public portion of our meeting. Thank you all.